After a weekend of some uncharacteristic play out of the Houston Cougars, they dropped their first Big 12 game of the season to Texas Tech, and it begs the question, can this team get better?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Making Locked On Sports Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network out there. If you enjoy the conversation down below and you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments. Honestly, how'd you stay warm this weekend as everyone seemed to freeze over in the great state of Texas? Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, best place to get on the action. Get more on that fun later as the playoffs are going. Best place to get profits and boosts and all kinds of fun stuff. But first, not so fun stuff. Houston loses over the weekend. I'll talk about how they can get bigger, better, more physical, what they got to do. I'll talk about one major turning point in the second segment that kind of shifted things in this game and how I'm not so sure the wrong decision was made there. And last but not least, we will visit about if this team is still national title good. Spoiler, they are, but let's talk about why. So, first segment, I do want to mention Houston got out Houstoned in this game. They got out physicaled, out toughed, and it was mostly seen at that rebounding area. Houston got out rebounded 44-28. They gave up 21 offensive rebounds. Texas Tech missed just 35 shots. That's a lot of their missed shots ended up being offensive rebounds, and roughly 2/3. And that's just not something we're used to seeing out of Houston. And frankly, in the last several years, you can kind of count on one hand the amount of times where it's felt like Houston just got out physical. They've been outscored. They're not undefeated. They've made other mistakes, but out physical is a different thing. And look, Sampson said earlier this season against Middle Tennessee State, and what was a narrow win for Houston over, it was probably a too close win. You could argue last year when Tech came to Houston and beat Houston in Fertitta Center, that was probably one other time. I'd argue San Diego State in Las Vegas was a time they got out physical. Central Florida was just a close win last year. Maybe Iowa State, out physical is a hard thing to say, but they certainly beat you up a little bit a couple of those times that first in the Big 12. And I think the deal here is like this just doesn't happen very often, right? Like this is not a common thing for Houston, but it's certainly a thing that happened on Saturday and led to them getting beat. And there are a lot of people that had a lot of other angles about what went wrong with Houston, foul call here, substitution there, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And Sampson himself said this to me. This is a family-friendly program, so we're going to bleep this out. But he said, I'm not going to bleep about the fouls when we got our butts kicked on the offensive rebounds. And so I think Sampson sees it this way too, right? Where like the deal here is really they just kind of got punked. And there are just not many times in the history of this program under Sampson we can say that. But Saturday was certainly one, and you got rebounded by a ton. And a big part of that was, honestly, you had bigs in foul trouble. So you had bigs out of the game, sure. And no one else outside of your first two bigs was getting any rebounds. Your starting backcourt, Kingston Flemings, Milos Uzan, and Emmanuel Sharp, had a combined 3 rebounds. Kingston had 2, Milos had 1, Emmanuel had none. That, given their minute distribution, is almost hard to do. And it's really, it speaks to the level of lack of physicality. You also kind of saw this when your bench started coming in. Khalifa Sacco, your bench big, came in and he had 0 rebounds in 12 minutes. Again, almost hard to do as a big man. Chase McCarty, who plays some power forward, plays some small forward, came in, had 0 rebounds in 8 minutes. He can shoot the ball great. Again, 0 rebounds for a guy in the Houston Cougar forward room is almost hard to do. What's almost more impressive is Ramon Walker and Isiah Harwell each They played 18 and 8 minutes respectively, and they each had 4. That ties for the 3rd most on the team. I mean, just ridiculous and just uncharacteristically so for Houston. Milos Uzan had a pair of turnovers as well. He averaged less than a turnover and a half a game last year, and he had the ball in his hands a lot more last year. And I almost looked at Milos's stat line and said he only had 1 foul. And given how the game was called, that also implies a lesser physical play out of him than we're used to seeing. I love Milos. I love what he brings. I'd argue he won you the Cincinnati game on the road this year. Played a key role against Arkansas. He won you a bunch of games last year. But honestly, you need one of those senior leaders like Milos to be leading the charge physically in your backcourt, especially when he's got a defensive predominant assignment. He's not being asked to do a whole bunch of scoring because Kingston got 42 and Emmanuel got 20. Uh, You're looking more so like, what else can you bring to me? And look, Milos again has won Houston games, but he was not an answer on Saturday. And frankly, Isiah Harwell, he only played 8 minutes because he made some very crucial mental mistakes that led to a couple key fouls and moments that Sampson didn't feel like he could trust him. Ramon Walker didn't give you much offensively, and you were trying to find points somewhere. And so he had to come out of the game. Khalifa Sacco could not give you rebounds. These guys couldn't provide in certain spots. And honestly, look, I I think this team's got plenty of room to grow and plenty of things to get better at. And frankly, we should give flowers where they're due. Texas Tech is a well coached team, a very talented team. They'll probably be in the top 10 by the time the polls come out Monday, and maybe higher than that even. Uh, all that is true. They were a blown lead away from Final Four last year, and they're probably better this year. Like they're very, very talented. They're very, very good. I think Houston is too. I think it's worth noting that Houston won this game by 4 and was in Houston and lost this game by 4 when it was in Lubbock. And that probably speaks to how truly similar these two teams are. But the thing that stinks about losing this one, as opposed to if you'd maybe like, hadn't come back and won the one in Houston, is this one felt like you didn't get to play your style of basketball. And had you just played closer to that, you'd have come away with a victory. Had you maybe cut off 5 or 6 of those offensive rebounds and cut off those possessions because Emmanuel gets one here or Milos gets one there, and yes, I know I'm fishing for 1 or 2 stats here, 1 or 2 stats there, but you're talking about a 4-point loss on the road. Each of those possessions proves so crucial. And I'm sure McCaslin Tech, Chris and Casey at Locked On Texas Tech said the same thing when the inverse happened in Houston. I am sure that every single game you can pick, but it just felt like usually with Sampson in charge of the last decade, Houston's getting those possessions, and they didn't do it on Saturday. And yes, JT Toppin is defending Big 12 player, the reigning Big 12 player of the year or whatever, and yada, yada, yada. Yes, those things are true, but they did it to him last year. Frankly, the game that Tech won, he notably didn't play most of last year, right? They honestly did it to him when it counted in the Houston game this year, and they did it against Tech with a different coach at Milan on that the year before. I I just I think the biggest thing to take away from this is that there were very uncharacteristic things. And look, Houston got stuck in Lubbock with weather and travel and whatever, and didn't get out till late Sunday night before, after playing on Saturday afternoon, right? And I don't know if they had gym days to practice in. I texted, it didn't sound like that was quite the case on Sunday. They're trying to get out of there, very much focused on that. I'd imagine that the film session reviewing this thing on early Sunday morning was absolutely brutal. I'd imagine that the kinds of questions being asked would strike at the core. I'd imagine because Houston has built a program, recruited to a program, and set a standard where these kinds of things typically don't happen. And then they did. And I look, You're not going to get out-toughed very often if you're Houston. And Texas Tech is one of a handful of teams that's even equipped to do it. But I don't think it's going to happen again this season. Like, I just think, especially, you got a stretch of games in mid-February we've kind of alluded to all season long, all year long, that are going to be really, really tough. You got a stretch between now and then to get ready for them. I'd imagine they look more than ready on Wednesday night. Now, physicality is not the only thing that happened on Saturday. There was another big stretch in the middle of the first half where some physicality got too far, fouls got called, and things tended to go sideways. And I don't think that's quite what cost them the game. I think it was actually stretched in the second half. Trust me, I'll explain in a second. I want to get to that. But first, as I mentioned, today's show is brought to you by everybody's over at FanDuel, because the last call for football on FanDuel, one final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get on the action before the NFL season's officially come to a close. And this is Super Bowl 60. And FanDuel's make sure you get right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding the underdog, or building some same game parlay. There's a couple of Coogs in this game, both Joneses. This is the game everyone's been waiting for. It's where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines. Every snap just feels bigger. And if you're new to FanDuel, want to get in the action, etc., just get in now while the getting is good. If you bet $5, get $200 back in bonus bets if you want to make it count. Because after the Super Bowl, the season's over. Last call for football on FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Pork Rangers locked on Coogs. And I got to say, thank you for making Locked on Coogs your first listen of the day. Making Locked Sports Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. And if you want more Locked on Coogs, just can't get enough Locked on Coogs, I got to recommend the Everydayer option. Now, we're still going to be giving you Everyday Locked on Coogs, but if you want more than that, some ad-free audio, invite to the members-only Discord server, all access episodes, one-on-one texting with me, a merch store, all kinds of things. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer to learn more about the Everydayer program. Or if you want to sign up for the Coogs right now, go to lockedoncoogs.supercast.com. I can't wait to talk to you more about the Coogs over there. We had some fun questions and back and forth on Saturday. We were trying to figure out what's going on with this team. We tried to talk about it in the subtext. Let us know over there. lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. Now, there was a major turning point in this game in the first half, but middle of the first half, about 10 minutes ago, you went up 7 at the 10:45 mark in the half. And then suddenly, 5 minutes later, at the 5:30 mark, you're down 1. And the big change there was the 10:30 mark. Tugler got his second foul. At the 9:30 mark, Chris Sinak got his second foul. You then very suddenly had fouls on Sacco and Harwell, and Tech had 5 offensive rebounds at 5-minute stretch. It did not go well. You then had a Sacco turnover. They make a 3. Kingston calls for travel. They make another 3. All of a sudden, it's 50-39. And that happens in a total, the 5-minute stretch and 2-minute stretch, about 7 minutes of basketball. You go from up 7 to down 11. And I don't mean the convenience store. That's not the way you want things to go, right? However, you lose a 5-minute window, you get blitzed in about 120 seconds, and a lot of things were like, okay, that's where the game went lost. You couldn't handle that 7-minute window. Things got crazy because you had to bench the 2 bigs, and they got like that has become a storyline about how where Houston lost this game. Texas Tech's best players, their big guy. Houston had to sit their 2 big guys. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? And that has then led to a lot of criticism on, like, you don't need to sit guys with 2 fouls, Sampson. What are you doing? Never mind that he's a Hall of Fame bound coach and all of that, right? People are criticizing that he had to sit both guys with 2 fouls and what that did with that team and that did all that kind of stuff, right? And I would point out that the response in the final few minutes of the half got Houston to they were down just 6 at the half. And further, the goal is not to win the first half. The goal is to win the basketball game. And look, Houston actually in the second half built back and got a lead. They had built a 4-point lead through the early, first 10 minutes of the second half. You want to call it the third quarter, they don't do quarters, but sure, right? And at the about that 10-minute mark again, about 10:50 in this point. They had 71 points. They wouldn't score again for another 3 minutes. And then when they got to score again, they got up to 77 about the 6:10-minute mark, the 6 minutes and 10-second mark. You're up 77-75. And then suddenly, about a minute later, like between 6:10 and 5:10, or 6:10 and 5:20, would be not even a minute. Houston goes from up 77-75 to down 81-77 because you go 3 turnover 3, and you give it just like that. And the exact same action for both threes, where they went high pick and roll. The high pick and roll got the ball to JT Toppin. Toppin then attacks the tagging roller from the help side. The help from the ball side off of a shooter both times. One time it was Kingston. The second time was Jason McCarty. Spit it out for 3. Both times Tech knocked it down. I believe those are the only 2 threes that Tech made in the second half. And they were absolute backbreakers. But because you raced to 71 and they went dry for a spell and could not build that lead, right? You could not be as great as the offense was for stretches of this game. You got, 86 points and you lost. That's not something that happens to Houston very often, right? 86 regulation points and you lost is not something that happens to Houston very often. But you raced to 71 and you stopped. You got paused for a second, right? And then you couldn't respond. That 4-point lead that Tech built in that 60 seconds, 50 seconds, right? That ended up being, you played them even after that, their lead they ran with the rest of the game. And Tech got to 81 with 5 minutes and 20 seconds left. They scored just 9 points the rest of the contest. It wasn't like it was some continued rat race down the rest of the stretch here. But that second half 5-minute window was really the one to me that lost this game, because you made up for the first one. You spent the first minutes of the half making up for that first half blunder. You got your guys back in. You overcame the foul trouble. You built the lead, and then you went dry at a bad time. And if you'd built on that lead in that window, if you continued to build on that lead, make good shots, make good decisions, not make those 2 turnovers, right? Those kinds of things in that stretch, you probably, doesn't matter if Tech gets those 2 threes. Further, and probably the way I'd envisioned Sampson going about this more, if you played that set better and not focus on tagging the roller from the play side like they did both times it gave up a 3, then ultimately I think you probably also don't lose this game, because you're not helping off of the 3-point shooter. You're not giving up an easy 3-point look. I think that's probably, if we're being honest, the way Sampson would have wanted to handle it more so. He'd have focused more on those 2 defensive mistakes. Or even if you went dry for those 3 minutes, that 50 seconds of bad defense ultimately bit you in the butt. And there are other if this, then that, if that, then this, and offensive putback here, defensive rebound, like, sure. This call, that call, sure. But ultimately, I think a lot got drawn up about, and myself included when I watch it live, like, why would get him back in, right? But in hindsight, watching the game a second time on Sunday, going back and checking through the notes, looking at the runs and the run charts and what, like, this game was not lost in that 5-minute stretch in the first half and the 7-minute stretch in the first half, because honestly, you overcame that. You already fought back from that. This was lost when you had the second pause, the second drop, the second relaxing of the offense, the second time it happened. And I think, again, I think offensively, I think offensive basketball, that's where my mind goes, right? This, to me, is kind of where Sampson's going to be focused on other defensive things too. But that 50 seconds where you gave up 6 points, and it was the only 3-pointers you allowed in the second half, and it was the only times you helped off the play side of that spit out, and the only times, that's going to really, really sting. And look, I didn't think Houston was going undefeated in Big 12 play. I didn't. This is a very, in the grand scheme of things, you lost to a top-tier team on the road by 4 in a very hostile environment with crazy travel conditions. It happens. But I do think it didn't have to happen, and it's that's the part that sucks. Now, I still think this team is a national title contending team, want to get to why that is, and as silly as that might be, and why we even need to argue about it, I guess, in just a second. But first, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Mazda. Because right now, Mazda is moving the game forward. For those who show that there's more in the score than what's on the screen. Look, Kingston Flemings had a highlight kind of day. There's no doubt about it. That was a 42-point performance, moved in the top. I mean, people having the top five of the NBA draft. There's all kinds of hype around finding a NBA home for Kingston Flemings very soon. And he raised the bar, and it reminds us about what raised the bar on the court, is focused on every detail, getting that extra fire that I never quit, never give up kind of mentality that Kingston has and that Mazda has. Mazda put the same passion into every model. Highlights make the real. What goes in there makes it count, and that's why there's more to every Mazda, because there's more to you. Mazda, move and be moved. Parker Ainsworth locked on Coogs here. And look, I think it's mostly national pundits. It's the normal ride the roller coaster kind of thing. Tech wins, so Tech's crazy. And when Houston beat Tech, Houston was crazy and all that kind of stuff. I do think, though, that people look at Houston and the defense this year. They gave up a bunch of points to Arkansas, a bunch of points to Tech over the weekend. They struggled at one point with Middle Tennessee State. They had a close game with Cincinnati. Like, wait a second. Can this team build off of last year's success? Last year's team was 60 seconds away from a national title. Can this year's team get over the hump? And it is January, and I want to stress that question still rubs me as a little bit silly to be asking in January. But I also think that the answer is yes, Houston can get over the hump. And I think what's fascinating about this year's team, as we watch a second time on Sunday and going through and taking extra notes and not just having fun with it, the outcome and all that kind of stuff, right, is that this year's team, it feels like, has a higher offensive ceiling than last year's team. And we're seeing that in how many points they're putting up too, but they're already the 15th ranked offense on KenPom in terms of adjusted offensive efficiency. Last year, as high as they finished, and the crazy run they went on at the end of the season, they finished at 19th. They finished at 12th. 2024, they finished at 19th. They finished 2023 when they played in the American Athletic Conference with much worse defenses at 11th. 2022, they were 10th, also in the American Athletic Conference. 2021, they went to Final Four. That was the 7th ranked adjusted efficiency offense. And I feel like what's pointing out here is Houston traditionally, over the course of their seasons, gets better by the end of the year. They're already at 15th. This thing will keep getting better. Watch it week by week. They will continue to get better and make improvements, assuming health, knock on wood, right? Then you look at defense. They're presently 7th. Last year, yes, they finished first. 2024, they finished second. 2023, 5th. 2022, 8th. 2021, 9th. They've been in the top 10 in adjusted defensive efficiency every year. But what's fascinating to me about that is, while Houston's typically even on that, like they stay the same roughly couple spots week by week over the course of the year in KenPom rankings. So it stands to reason they will get higher than 5th this year. They'll stay roughly 5th to 8th, somewhere in there, right? This year's team plays 3 true and 1 redshirt freshman in their top end of the rotation. They mostly play younger players. And defense is actually, to me, we're going to see the most growth over the course of the season. Because last year's team, right, when they have the tough game against UCF they shouldn't have had, or the loss against Texas Tech at home, or whatever, right, those seniors had heard the Sampson speeches before. Those seniors had had those rough film sessions before. Those seniors had been taught. And they were just being reminded. This year's team is being taught. This year's team is largely guys that are being thrown in the fire for the first time. Again, Kingston Flemings, Chris Sinak, and Isiah Harwell were at the prom last spring. These guys that were truly in high school last year. Chase McCarty, a redshirt freshman, didn't get a minute of playing time last year, right? These are guys that are growing before our eyes. So while typically Houston stays even keel across the defensive line and gets better on offense. I think Houston's actually going to get better at both this year and continue to climb up the ranks in both those. And those analytics don't mean everything, and I that's absolutely true. It is a way to measure where this team stacks up. And Houston is just 17-2. This is not a team where the sky is falling, the world is ending. Oh my goodness, what's going on with Houston? They're 17-2, and they play in the best conference in America and one of the best years it's ever existed. They're gonna be okay. Yes, they have a stretch of 3 really tough games back to back to back in February, and they gotta get ready between now and then to go through that. That's gonna be really tough. I'm picking them. I'm picking them. Now, I also think it's worth pointing out that part of my reason I'm picking them, and part of the reason I'm feeling so confident in that, is this team is ahead of schedule offensively. Full stop. Like, they are ahead of schedule. They have found a guy at Kingston they can go to for a bucket. They understand the get of Emmanuel. They bring in guys to the bench to shoot like Chase, and they know they get a hustle out of Ramon and Isiah. They've even had hot shooting games from Isiah too. They understand offense well, and frankly, it's like a bonus when you get that 8 points at a Tugler or when Sanak is hitting his threes. Those things work, right? And this staff has earned the benefit of the doubt. They're going to continue to grow this team defensively because they've got several versions of this, but we've seen them take guys new to Cougar basketball and have them grow defensively the course of the season, right? And there's multiple examples of this happening this year. But when we think about like the 2024 group, and LJ Cryer came over from Baylor, and Cryer was an efficient scorer at Baylor, right? He was a great shooter, instant offense, right? His big hang up at Baylor was they didn't think he was a very good defender. Part of the reason he chose Houston was to come home. He's from Houston, right? But it was also to get better at that thing he was not so good at to go pro. By the end of the season in 2024, look, he wasn't like beating Jamal Shed out for the best assignment or whatever, but he was absolutely a good defender by the end of the season. And look at like the growth of Emmanuel. Emmanuel had a crazy leg injury his senior of high school. Look at where he was by his sophomore year at Houston. This staff has built up guys that come in as great offensive weapons and turned them into good defenders very quickly, very often, especially these perimeter guys like Kingston and Isiah, right? And so I think this staff has built up a resume where we should understand that Kingston is going to make freshman mistakes in January that freshmen make in January, but we can believe that he'll have them fixed by February and March and so on. Same with Isiah, same with Chris, same with Chase. We've seen it done before with guys new to the system, new to the program. The difference between this year and last year is when LJ and J1 needed those reminders, or when Malik needed those reminders, or JVR needed those reminders, right? They were truly reminders. They'd been taught it before. These guys have to get taught it. And it's being taught. It's just happening after, in this case, their second loss of the season. Oh, man, right? I also think it's worth pointing out this is a time where you're seeing this team run into a top-tier opponent, a returning Big 12 Player of the Year, crazy good shooting all around him. And, I mean, they punish you if you double down, and if you're, also working to turn their probably second best player, Christian Anderson, into a pass-first player. They've done that successfully both times, but that means you have to, only plug up so many holes with the dam. I think part of it's that too, that this was just a really talented opponent running into you twice in the month of January, right? Again, that's both times you played them in the month of January. They've got the video, you've got the video. They've got a more veteran-laden group, right? And I think that this is all growing, all positive, all good. I will say, and we'll talk about TCU this week because Houston plays TCU Wednesday. Houston does not lose back-to-back games very often. I mean, think about it. It's like they entered the conference, lost back-to-back games, hadn't lost a whole lot of back-to-back games since, didn't lose a whole lot of back-to-back games before that. Between the film session Sunday morning, that they don't lose back-to-back games, and frankly, the let's say a resolve of guys to not have a film session like that Thursday morning, I would feel really bad for TCU. And TCU is a good basketball team. They fought Michigan tooth and nail. They put a beating on Florida. They pushed some other good teams so far this year. Like TCU is good. We'll preview that game. It's gonna be a good game. And frankly, I've got ties to one of the players. I like that. I like the guy. I know on that team a lot and all that. Right. At the end of the day, I think Houston's gonna punish him. I think he's gonna punish him a lot. And we bring it down here at Locked on Coogies J this week. We're also looking for more of a portal wrap up as things start to calm down. So hit subscribe and hit the bell so you know when things go live so we can get that to you as well. And thank you for making Locked on Coogies your first listen. Make sure you hit subscribe to make sure the show continues to grow and thrive. I can't wait to talk to you all about the Houston Cougars again tomorrow. Locked on Cougars is primarily the Locked on Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.